But I tell people that there's a very, very high cost of cheap food, but you don't pay it at the checkout counter. So in our community, you start with a farmer. The suicide rate in Montana is the highest in the country, and a lot of those dealing with agriculture. So you're destroying farmers. They're losing their farms so that the farms are paid. When the farms go, and you mentioned earlier, but the communities start to decline. Our little town has lost half of its business. We used to have 5 grain elevators in town. Now there's 0 because the grain companies have figured out how to make big terminals and force farmers to haul their grain 10 times further than they did to town. The closest town, the Big Sandy here, we haul it now 50 miles and 80 miles, sometimes 100 miles away, the big grain rail terminal. So all of that industrialization has destroyed or is this leading to the decline of small towns in rural America clear across the country.
Hi, I'm Jason.
I'm Fran.
This is Bo Peter.
And I'm Nicole. And this is Marketing for What Matters, where we explore how marketing paired with a regenerative mindset can uplift humanity, heal the planet, and still achieve profitable business growth.
Hey, welcome to a new episode of the Marketing for What Matters podcast. I'm Jam at Peaceful Media. I'm so happy that you're here. And I'm excited to introduce you a new friend of mine, Bob Quinn. He's our guest today, and he's also the founder of the Quinn Institute, which is a research facility studying the art and science of regenerative organic agriculture, partnered up with Rodale Institute to study what works well in the plains, in the food system and food grower systems in the northern plains of Montana. And so if you're here for hardcore marketing advice and techniques and strategies, this is probably not the episode of Marketing for What Matters. However, if you're here to build a massively successful brand and you have a regenerative mindset, really thinking about the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit, then you're going to love this episode. I fell in love with Bob's story and what he's learned in his business pursuits, which have all been extremely successful. From ancient wheat to biofuel to renewable energy, Bob's done it. And what I noticed is a through line of his ability to build relationships and really listen to his customers' needs and find ways to continually add substantial value to his customers' lives so that everyone wins. And speaking of wins, one of the intentional byproducts of all of his business success has been seen in his local community there in Big Sandy, Montana, where intentionally new opportunities and jobs are created and a renewed sense of vibrancy has been allowed to come back to this small town in Montana. Bob is an amazing, phenomenal human being, and I can't wait for you to hear his philosophies for building a successful business. Without further ado, let's get into this episode. Hey, welcome. I'm Jam at Peaceful Media, and I'm joined by Bob Quinn here in the Marketing for What Matters podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today for what's going to be a very fruitful conversation, no pun intended. I'm joined, as I said, by Bob Quinn. He's a serial entrepreneur and the founder of the Quinn Institute, as well as a prolific writer and written a really fabulous book here called Grain by Grain. As you can see, I thoroughly enjoyed it and bookmarked it to all, like every other page had a bookmark. So I thought we'd start this interview session here, Bob, by opening up with just a quick reading from chapter 17 of Grain by Grain. If you wouldn't mind doing the pleasure of going ahead and reading those first two paragraphs for us.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to do it. Imagine I told you there was a product that could dramatically reduce the incidence of 4 of the top 7 causes of death in the United States, lift thousands of Americans out of poverty, fight climate change, all while slowing the growth of marine dead zones and reversing pollinator decline. If this were an app, venture capitalists would be falling all over themselves to fund it. If this were a new gadget, it would be making headlines and winning awards. But the common solution that an increasing number of people are now proposing is a response to these other problems is not a new app. It's not a new gadget. Rather, it's about revaluing something we have come to take for granted, our food.
And that's a wonderful frame for today's conversation. Food is medicine is a core tenet and a communication through line in all the videos that you post on LinkedIn and Facebook and social media for the Quinn Institute, Bob. Would you mind just sharing a little bit, just an overview of what the Quinn Institute is setting out to do in partnership with Rodale Institute?
Sure. Well, first of all, we have about a 3,000 acre organic small grains production farm in north central Montana. I've got 5 kids, and the oldest is in their 40s now. After 40 years, no one showed up on my doorstep to take over the farm. So I'm the 3rd generation, and I hated it for it to just be sold down the street eventually. So I decided to take 700 acres out of the middle of it and create a regenerative organic research, education, and health institute. So that's what we're doing. We're in the 1st year of it. Actually, we're really excited about it. We are focusing on helping organic farmers convert from chemical to organic systems, helping organic farmers that already have converted keep being successful. We want to educate them and educate the public about how they can grow more of their own food. If they don't have a farm, they can have a garden maybe, or a garden spot, or at least a few pots on their patio. So we want to have educational focuses on that. Have a teaching kitchen that teaches people what to do with a turnip once they get that far out of their garden, how to preserve their food so they can eat it all year round. We want to have some health practitioners on staff to focus with on chronic disease and prescribe food off the farm rather than pills out of the pharmacy. So that's just kind of an overview of what we're hoping to do the next 3 or 4 years to get started, and hopefully it can be a help to the neighborhoods. We want to have community links. We want to serve the northern Great Plains, but particularly the shortgrass prairie of the northern Great Plains, which is Montana east of the Rocky Mountains, the Dakotas, western half of the Dakotas, southern Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, little pieces of Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska. So that's our region. Besides Rodale, we hope to also partner with university research stations, with other private institutes like the Land Institute, and anyone who wants to do something similar and work hand in hand in focusing on food as medicine. Our whole vision is healing the earth by growing food as medicine.
Yes, and in reading your book and reading your story of how you grew up, you weren't always this invested and this fascinated and this sort of prolific in the organic, regenerative, organic space, agriculture space. And so I would love to do a little history lesson for people, because I thought that was one of the more fascinating pieces of U.S. history and perhaps worldwide history, and how we got to where we're at in modern conventional agriculture. I'm putting some big air quotes around conventional, of course. So you're a 4th generation farmer. Let's do the how you got to where you're at today. And I think it'll illuminate a lot of the problems that we're facing in our society, as both people who eat food, but also people who grow food. So you're a 4th generation farmer. You're growing up in an era in the 50s and 60s and witnessing really a big tectonic shift in how agriculture is done in the United States. Farmers were, throughout the Second World War, they were national heroes, growing food and proudly, helping our country eat well throughout the war. And so they're kind of like, like I said, national heroes. And then it feels like in the 50s and 60s, there was a very concerted effort to convince those farm operators and growers to dive into what I think you do a good job of painting as a chemical-soaked, nutrient-depleted, highly commoditized race to the bottom, where very few win, including the people consuming those foods. So that's a lot there, but will you help us understand just like the conventional wisdom in the United States agriculture scene during that era?
Okay, well, all right. If I get off track, you just let me know.
It's all good.
my great-grandfather had a dairy in northern Idaho, north of Bonners Ferry. He, in about 1919, traded that dairy for a wheat and cattle ranch southeast of Big Sandy, Montana, which is in north central Montana, a booming town that at that time in 1919, that the homesteaders were just starting to go broke. They had a terrific year in 1916, and then they had drought. And so people were leaving by the droves. And my great-grandfather came in on that scenario. He got some town property and some a good size couple of thousand acres of wheat and cattle. And anyway, he moved here. And my grandfather, who was in World War I at the time in France, when he got back to Idaho, found they were gone, and he followed them here to Big Sandy, married my grandmother because they had fallen in love before the war and they were set to be married. And so that's how Quinn Farm and Ranch started, with my grandfather in 1920 and his marriage to my grandmother, right up the creek, right next door to his in-laws. And so he went through the 20s and 30s and 40s. Of course, the Depression came in 29, the Dust Bowl came in the 30s, and they had a tough time. He had to go to Spokane to live with his parents and with his family, I think in the winter of 36, just to survive. They were just out of money, almost out of hope. But they decided to come back that next spring and just try it one more year. And in that year was a little bit better. And 38 was a little bit better. 39, then the war came. Of course, there was big demand, and the weather had turned more favorable, and they were off. My father came back from the Navy. He was in the Navy in World War II, and married my mother, who was from, she's born in Pennsylvania, raised in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and brought her out to the ranch in 48, just a little after I was born. They were married in 46, and he lived in Georgia for a couple of years, trying to see if he could turn into a city guy working for Westinghouse, and that wasn't satisfying to him. So he came back to his roots, and I'm glad he did. This is where I was raised, is all I remember. I got here less than a year old, and my sister joined me a couple of years later. And so there's just the two of us growing up on, as I said, a 2,400 acre wheat and cattle ranch. And things were fairly good. In the 50s, we had some drought and challenges in the 60s that I can remember. But I remember my father building his first sprayer. I was too young to really appreciate what was going on, but the countryside was just grabbed on to chemical herbicides like they were a magic wand, because weed pressure, I remember my dad telling me stories how he would have to ride on the front of the combine and with a broomstick push the weeds into the combine. I know you would have never allowed such a thing. It was really dangerous. But the weed problems in the wheat fields were horrendous, and they didn't really have rotations that would have helped with that or anything else. They had come to the prairies and broken the prairies, and we're in an area where they can only raise one crop every other year, so they were summer following everything half a year, and then growing a crop on that summer fallow where they didn't raise anything to collect water the second year. But that summer fallow, having that nuded ground, really opened up for the Dust Bowl and a lot of soil erosion. So that was a thing that was changed in the 50s. We went to strip cropping, which was having very narrow strips. Every other strip was fallow or grain, and so that it cut down on the wind erosion. So we saw that change take place. Then we saw the coming of fertilizers, and that was not so easily adopted. And of course, these chemical wonders were coming out of what used to be the war effort, and the bomb makers and everything else. They decided they could do something in peacetime and still make a lot of money. And so they were pushing all these chemicals, and the ground had not been farmed that many years from native soil, from native prairie at least. And so they didn't see a lot of immediate response with the chemicals. But after 4 or 5 more years of farming, and they were kind of on the edge. My dad was a great experimenter, so he was experimenting all the time, and he started to be convinced that the chemical fertilizers were paying their way and were adding additional bushels, additional yield to his crops. So it was sort of a natural no one really questioned this that I remember hearing in my neighborhood at least. Once it's demonstrated that they get more yield, then that was the name of the game, and it was on and on like that for some time, and even all through school. That's all I heard, and that's all I was taught. So when I got to California in my graduate school, my love was plants.
I'm going to pause you there, Bob, because I'm going to take you. We're going to get to your PhD program in California.
Okay.
First, I want to hover real quickly on the corporate influence and government policy that really changed there in the 70s. Economic Development Council, headed by major corporations here in the U.S., getting together with the USDA to develop a go big or go home policy. Can you kind of share what happened there in the 70s?
Well, again, no one ever knew about the backstory of any of that. All we knew was that we were encouraged to plant ancestral and plant as much as we could because America was depending on export. We are a wheat producing state, and most of our wheat was exported. We're fairly close on the railroad to the West Coast. I was going to Asia, where they said our high quality wheat, and also our wheat went to the milling centers of the country to mix with lower protein wheats coming out of Kansas and other wheat growing areas. It had more production, but less protein. And so we were in a really highly sought after area for wheat production. And so things are really encouraged to just plant as much and become specialized as much as possible. So when I was growing up, there was a great diversity on the farmsteads. Every farmstead had some pigs and some chickens and some cows. Everybody had a milk cow or two. We raised a lot of our own food. My mother would sell cream and at the local store with eggs, even though there's just a few dozen. It didn't matter. They loved them. And I remember butchering chickens once and taking them up to Havre, which is the nearest big town, about 50 miles away. And the storekeeper said, "Wow, do you have any more of these?" Because they were good quality, and we were proud of that. And but that wasn't our main business. That was just a little grocery money for my mom or a little extra stuff she wanted to do. We never had any a big extra amount of money. And so that was just a little bit of a fun thing that she could put in her cookie jar. But everybody had that. And in the 60s and the 70s, that started to disappear. It was back to the farm in the late 70s. My folks had gotten rid of most of that stuff. I had some small kids, and I kind of wanted them to have the same experience I had. So we got back chickens and got a milk cow. And I don't know if we got any pigs. The pigs would get out and root up my garden. And that was my favorite spot on the farm was my garden. I loved plants and to grow things. So I didn't really relish the pigs as much, but we would have some of the other animals. But as things got bigger and bigger, farmers had less time to take care of animals and do chores and whatnot because they're in the field all the time. It became more and more industrial. We really didn't think of it that way as it evolved. But once you arrived, that's what you saw.
Slowly boiling water.
It was once the conversion had happened, then you could look around and say, "Oh my gosh, we don't have anything that we used to have." And in the meanwhile, with the modern advent of all these wonder chemicals, these all cost a lot of money, and the price of grain was never going up. It was going up and down, and many years people could hardly afford to pay for their input costs that now they were hooked on because they had been taught that this is the only way to farm. And we were losing neighbors left and right. And so after 50 years or so, half my neighbors were gone that I had when I was growing up. At least the farms were gone. They had been absorbed by neighbors, most of them. The town of Big Sandy had dwindled from 1,000 when I was in school down to 600. It is now barely 600. Main Street's half boarded up. So it's just like a vicious cycle. Once you lose your farm base and the people supporting the communities, then it just spirals on down, and it's kind of a rush to the bottom.
And before you moved your family back there and sort of witnessed the sort of devolution, the degradation of what we think of as traditional farming into chemical soaked industrialized agriculture. So basically the USDA is saying farms, you're either going to go as big as possible, produce as much as possible, be as efficient as possible. You're either going to go big or you're just going to have to stop what you're doing. And so farms, I mean, there was a government policy, subsidized government policy from the United States that said, you're going to do it this way or you're just not going to have a livelihood anymore. That's backdrop when you're going off to your PhD program. I know you had to stop in Bozeman, a couple grad and postgrad there, but then you go to PhD in UC Davis, which is one of the country's foremost agriculture schools, ag schools. Just learning the cutting edge of agriculture technology. And you get there, and I get the between the lines story in your book is that you're becoming more and more disillusioned with where farming is going, and it's punctuated with a really poignant story in a peach orchard. Could you take us to that peach orchard there in Northern California?
Sure. This is actually the first time I ever questioned the direction we were going with chemical agriculture. I was in studying plant biochemistry. That was my major, but I was still. It was a breadbasket to me. It was a wonder place that they could grow anything, and so I would sit in classes in the ag school and the crops production classes, and in the summer times they would have tours around California that would take people the students to different cropping systems and just show them. And I signed up for 2 or 3 of those. And the first one I'd signed up for, we went down the Central Valley and stopped at a peach orchard. And when I was growing up, we got our peaches in wooden boxes. They were double wrapped, and you would open them up and put the peaches on the counter. And within a few days, they were perfectly ripe and delicious. When I got to California, there were peaches also near Davis, where I was going to school, and we would go out. My wife and I did a lot of canning and still making a lot of our own food. Of course, later on, a student dole. It was quite slim, and we're living on $200 a month. That was what we lived on. That was amazing to think of these days. In subsidized housing. And so we would go out to the peach orchard, and the farmer would say, well, he said, are you planning to can this afternoon or tomorrow or the next day? And depending on what we said, he'd said, go to this pile of crates or this pile of crates. And the peaches were so ripe. If you're planning this afternoon, they were just dead ripe. And they were so sweet and succulent, and the aroma was fantastic. And we take those home and can them, and they're just wonderful. I mean, it was almost like picking them off a tree, really, instead of shipping them. They weren't totally green, but partially ripe to Montana, as I saw when I was a youth. And when I went to this peach orchard, they said, okay, they're just getting ready for harvest. I got off the bus, and I couldn't smell anything. I couldn't smell any aromas of ripening peaches. And they took us out to the peach orchard and lifted the trees, and the fruit was gorgeous. Looked like they were dead ripe. Then they picked one and showed it to us, and it was as hard as a rock. And you cut it open, it wasn't fit to eat. It wasn't ripe at all. It just looked ripe. And the story was that our professor leading the trip, and this farmer grower had gotten together and figured, and they're testing a spray of some kind of mixture of petrochemicals that sprayed on the tree caused the fruit to change color so it looked dead ripe, but it was dead green. And they loved this because they could harvest the fruit and ship them in big crates. They didn't have to put them in individual boxes or anything. They ship them in big crates clear across the country without any bruising. And of course, when you get ripe peach, it bruises, just instantly. It's very, you have to tell it very, very gently. And you can't be shipping it in crates, big boxes across the country without individual, protection. And they thought this was a wonderful thing. So when they got to the store shelf, they put it on the store shelf, and they were beautiful, but they didn't taste any good. And a lot of times it would start to rot from the center out. And it was so, I thought, This isn't progress. This is kind of a fraud. You're pretending to project something that isn't true. You're projecting something that looks and should taste delicious, but it only looks delicious. It doesn't taste like anything you really want to eat. And they were hailing this as, modern advances in agriculture. And that was the first time that I ever questioned the direction we were going. It wasn't the last, but it was the first time. And that, it didn't cause me to connect that yet to what we were doing in Montana, because we weren't doing that. We were still producing high protein wheat that tasted good and, and acted right and everything else. I didn't think about how we were doing it because it wasn't the same kind of product. But this one really made an impression on me because they had changed something that was important.
Yeah, I should say, University of California at Davis is one of our clients here at Peaceful Media, and I want to just say this gently, like the professor was profiting on this new product that was being revealed, and that's just kind of like where the United States.
Yeah. Yes, it was, and no one thought
driving everybody. It's just it was influencing everybody to find the thing that will help us get that biggest yield and most profit for this this industry as possible.
It was all about, in this case, it was cutting costs. They were thinking, how can we make it as cheap as possible? And when it's as cheap as possible, then there's still a little bit more margin for us to make. The people in the middle, and that's what was being pushed. No one, I don't think anybody gave any thought to nutrition or shorting the end user. It wasn't a deliberate thing on cheating anybody. It was just, how can we make more money and make things cheaper? It was all about efficiency. It was all about consolidation and all those things. No one gave a thought to the fallout from all of that stuff.
Yeah, and so the soul of food, the nutrition, the food is medicine, is completely knocked out as if it were hit with a series of antibiotics in a way.
Yeah.
So from UC Davis, you get called back to the farm, and I couldn't tell from your book whether or not the farm was failing or anything like that, but it seemed like the family wanted you to be there to help get it back going again, and you.
No, I was in a good situation. Right. It was a good situation.
PhD. You have this
What's
PhD.
that?
You have this PhD. You're well studied. You're coming back to the farm with all this new a new brain, with a new way of thinking, and you take a look at your family's farm operation books, like the accounting, and you start looking and scrutinizing how subsidies work and who actually benefits from subsidies when a significant chunk, if not all of it, is going towards the chemical inputs, the fertilizers, and all that. So could you kind of share what you exposed there and what you realized?
Well, that's something I didn't stumble on until I started playing with organic experiments. When I got back to the farm, even though the farm was in good shape, but it was in good shape because, my dad was a great operator and very careful and good farmer, but it was also the right size for one family. It's 2,500 acres, supported one family. Now we are two families on the farm. And that was a problem financially because there wasn't enough income for two families, really. And so we tried to figure out how can we add value to what we had. And I tried many different things that we don't have time to even talk about in this program. But the one that succeeded was selling our wheat to high protein bakers or whole grain bakers in Southern California who loved our wheat because of its high protein. And they could make really good bread with it and really high quality stuff. And after we were in business, a cousin of mine in Southern California found them. He didn't have a job. And I said, well, why don't you see if we can sell wheat together? And that's how we started our business. It's called Montana Flour and Grain. And after 1 year, our main customer called up and said, you think you can find some organic wheat for me like this? Same quality. And to tell you the truth, I had heard about organic in California, but I still was focused so much on my experience with chemicals, although I didn't think of it that way. It just that's you did, that I thought I had been taught, and I believe that a plant couldn't tell the difference between a molecule of nitrogen coming out of a manure pile and one coming out of a bag of ammonium sulfate, a chemical application. And that's what I've been taught, and that's what I believe. So I thought this organic stuff was a little bit of, smoke and mirrors, a little bit of hooey. And, but yet I was not willing to let my customer's request go unheeded. I didn't want to disappoint him. They were a good customer, so I went looking for organic grain. I found some and sent them a truckload, had it cleaned and bagged, and then my new farmer friend signed a certificate saying it was organically grown according to California law, and that's what it was in those days. That's all you did. And then my customers loved it so much, he wanted some more, and some more, and some more. And so I was really trying to scramble, finding everything I could. And because this is in 84 now, 1984, there weren't that many organic farmers in Montana or anywhere, actually. But I found all I could. And that winter, I had a whole new group of friends. And I started going to their meetings, and they were telling me, well, I should back up and say, when I used to go to the regular farm organizational meetings, it was woe is me, the prices in the toilet, the government programs aren't helping us like we could, and on and on and on and on. And when I went to this organic friends meetings, it was kind of discussion. They talked about how they could feel the tilth had changed under their feet as they walked over their fields. The soil wasn't as hard, and it was more soft, and they could grow their own fertilizer by growing legumes, and they could reduce or eliminate herbicides by doing crop rotations. And I was very intrigued about this. I left university because I become a little disillusioned with the power struggle and the kingdom building that was occurring in the laboratories. I didn't really want to be a part of that. I wanted to do science. That's what I wanted to do. Ask questions and try to solve problems. And back to the farm I came, and I had a chance to do that, but in different ways than I expected. So when I was introduced to these organic ideas, I told my dad, we got to try this. This sounds so interesting to me. And so we tried 20 acres in 86, and right next to 20 acres of chemical winter wheat. We had winter wheat in both cases. The organic grain had come off of an alfalfa strip that we had planted about 3 or 4 years previous. And so that had built up the soil. And that's what my friends told me you needed. You needed a legume of some kind to build up the soil, add nitrogen back and plant material back, and trace the organic matter and all that stuff. Feeding the microbes, although they didn't get into that much detail at that time, but that's what was going on. And at harvest time, both crops were nearly the same protein in the 15 and a half range, nearly the same yield. Both of them were about 36 to 38 bushel. That year is kind of an average year, and that was very good. My father was astounded. Here he had been paid tens of thousands of dollars a year for all these inputs to grow a crop that I had produced or equaled with none of that. And so I was very excited about that. Tried to get him to go 50% of the farm into organic the next year, but we started more like 15%. And by the second year, we had another success, and I just quit chemicals 100% after 2 years of experiments with organic. So when we started to go to organic, then I noticed that the government subsidies that we're getting, and they were based, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but the programs are based on your yields. And the higher yields you've got, the more money you got. So it was a big incentive to get as much production as you could, because your government payments came to you, and they were just automatic payments in those days. And they were tied to your yield history. So everybody was after more and more yield, which meant more and more inputs. But the astounding thing to me was that on our farm, so we had about 1,200 acres of pasture, 1,200 acres of, it was crop ground. So half of that crop was summer fallow, half was in crop, actually. So 600 acres of crop each year. We were spending for the summer fallow, we weren't doing any chemical on the summer fallow, but on the crop year, we were spending about 25 plus or minus $2,000 or $3,000 a year on our inputs. And then it dawned on me, just jumped off the page at me that here was our government checks coming in, almost exactly the same amount. So it wasn't really a check to us. It was a check to our chemical companies, and they were going through our checkbook. So it was an in and out. And that I was quite astounded by that. No one ever talked about that in those terms ever. I never heard anybody talk about that. And it was astounding to me to see that, how close it was related. And so, of course, the chemical companies were very careful in helping put together a farm program that maximized their ability to sell as much as possible. And that's what had happened over the course of several decades.
Throughout Green Grain, you expose how the modern agriculture industry has been designed to sort of squeeze every little last bit of profit out of the soil with really very little or no concern for downstream externalities and impacts, especially in, the communities surrounding farms. But after watching this design play out for over 50 years, we can see that it's severely a flawed race. It's a severely flawed race to the bottom. And with exception of the Monsantos and big petrochemical, input providers and other industrialized agriculture corporations, nobody's winning this race. And it's not the farmers. Certainly.
It's called extraction.
Yeah.
Extraction from rural America.
Communities or the food they grow. It's certainly not the consumers. And also, it's not our climate. Everything is hurting except for their bottom lines.
Yeah.
And so, the land itself as well. So the big question for you, Bob, and this is something you talk about a lot in the book, so I will just keep this broad, but how do we get back on track?
Well, there's one more portion that you need to also consider. Because everything you said is absolutely true. But the other half of the picture now is the healthcare industry. So the big pharma now is in bed with the big chemical companies. In fact, we have now Bayer. Bayer has bought Monsanto. So we have the biggest one in America. Actually, there isn't even an American company now; it's an international company. Has their foot in both camps soundly, making money with your chemicals, and then making money with all the pills that they sell to the people that are sick as a result of eating this many times contaminated food, and also food that is decreased in nutrition, deteriorated in nutrition. So I always talk, the thing that everybody points to that's in control and is trying to sell this message in this program is to the abundance of cheap food. And the government really was the leader of this after World War II, seeing the famines in Europe. They promised that we had never seen anything like that in America. And so the whole focus became on abundance and cheap. And the chemical companies played right into that, and everybody else, the things we talked about earlier with the consolidations and the lessening costs everywhere you could. So that food was cheap and food was abundant. But I tell people that there's a very, very high cost of cheap food. Don't pay it at the checkout counter. And the things you mentioned, alluded to, that's who pays. So in our community, you start with a farmer. The suicide rate in Montana is the highest in the country, and a lot of those dealing with agriculture. So you're destroying farmers. They're losing their farms, so that the farms are paying. When the farms go, and you mentioned earlier, but the communities start to decline. Our little town has lost half of its business. We used to have 5 grain elevators in town. Now there's 0, because the grain companies have figured out how to make big terminals and force farmers to haul their grain 10 times further than they did to town, the closest town, the Big Sandy here. We haul it now 50 miles and 80 miles, sometimes 100 miles away, to big grain rail terminals. And so all that industrialization has destroyed, or is this leading to the decline of small towns in rural America clear across the country. The next item, and you alluded to this, was our environment. So we're polluting our environment. We've got glyphosate in the groundwater, in the soil, now in the rain, in the surface water. We have all kinds of other chemicals contaminating every facet of our country. We have wells in Iowa that children are prohibited from drinking from because of high nitrates in it. We have a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. It's as big as New Jersey. And we have all this erratic weather that greenhouse gases have played a role in. And one of the main ones is coming from CO2 that's coming out of the soil from lowering the organic matter, just the way we're farming. And then finally, the biggest one who's paying is the health of our people. Right now, 60% of the entire population in the United States has at least one chronic disease, and that's over half. 60%. It's over half the people are sick. And at CDC, so the government agency even says that 60% of that is due to the poor nutrition people are receiving, contributing to these chronic diseases. And there's no end of this in sight. It's just getting worse and worse. The big pharma, they're not too concerned about that because the more sick people are, the more pills they can sell. And they don't sell pills that can heal you. They only sell pills that help you function. So you don't die right away, so you can spend all your money on them. But you're never cured. The only cure is getting off that and getting on good, healthy food that's clean and pure, and also chock full of nutrition that can reverse those chronic diseases. That's part of the cure. Anyway, that's what's happening. And I forgot what the question was.
And the question, yeah. So you.
Oh, how do you get back to it? Is that what you
said? The specific details of all the problems, but how do we get back on track?
Yeah. Okay, that's right. I'm sorry. I get so wrapped up in and where we're at, I forget to talk about where we're going, because to me that's the most important thing is where we're headed. Do we want to continue heading this direction? If we do, it's just ruin. I mean, there's no solution in sight. It's just going to get worse and worse. And how many people have to be sick before we think we're going in the right direction? How big does the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico have to get before we think we're going in the right direction? How many farmers have to go broke before we're going in the wrong direction? So the solution of that, in my mind, is to reconnect so everybody can understand and appreciate what's going on, to reconnect the whole idea of food and medicine. Hippocrates talked about this. He said, let medicine be your food and food be your medicine. That was 2,300 years ago, for heaven's sakes. How long does it take us to rediscover ancient wisdom? But that's what's starting to be talked about here and now again, finally. Because the industrial model, although it started out with really good intentions and a good goal of having cheap, abundant food, that's nothing about that goal. It's just the way that it was achieved has caused so many other problems that it completely subverts the reason that we should have supported it in the first place. So now, if we could reconnect food and health and focus on nutrition, what if farmers are paid by the nutrients they produce per acre rather than the pounds they produce per acre? Wonder if we paid farmers like pharmacists, and people say, "Oh no, we can't pay more for food. We can't pay more for food." Well, guess what? 50 years ago, you paid twice your annual budget for food than you're paying now. It's so cheap. But guess what has taken its place? Healthcare has taken its place. 50 years ago, you paid half what you're paying now for healthcare. So if you add those two together, they equal about 27 to 28% of your total budget, the household budgets in America. That has not changed. The two together have not changed. What has changed is who is above the other, who's in the lead, and where the growth is. And these are expensive. This is fund growth. It's not income. This is expense. And it also carries with it just not financial expense, but also hardships. I mean, the suffering that goes along with being sick and watching family members who are ill. This is really tough. You can't put a cost on that or a price on that. And that's what's happening. And if we could pay a little more to our farmers to raise food as though it were medicine, that means the ground, the soil has to be healthy. You have to start with good seed. You can't put poisons on it. You've got to do rotations and other soil building crops and systems. And maybe your yield isn't going to be as high as it was, but your nutrition is going to be astronomically more than it was. And that's what you should be paid for. And that's what will help solve the financial crisis of the communities, the start to heal the earth in its pollutions and its climate chaos that I think we're in. And finally, and most importantly, it should heal our people and our population.
Love it. Yeah. The spirit of your book is coming through loud and clear here, Bob. And one of the other big themes was value. The word value, how we define value. And this is how everybody listening to this podcast can benefit, because we're all consumers of this food system in one way or another. So I'd love for you to define value as you see it, and almost take us on a journey of how your philosophy manifested into how your philosophies around value manifested into business success.
Oh, well, okay. When you talk about business success, my philosophy in business is everybody wins. And so if you put together a business model that starts, in our case, for agriculture. So we start with the farmer, and the farmer wins. That means he gets a good price. He gets dealt fairly with. He doesn't, if he makes a contract, it's honored, all that kind of stuff. He gets a price that can pay his expenses plus have a decent living like everybody else is trying to achieve. And then you go to the next level, the manufacturers or the processors, and you make sure that they are not making their money off the backs of somebody else, like the farmers. They trying to push on price and buy cheap, but they're making their money by producing a high value product. They're not filling it full of cheap gimmicks, sugars or flavors or additives that make it look, smell, or appear artificially better than it is. But they are rewarded for preserving the nutrition and the high quality that the farmers are producing and delivering to them. And then I think that rather than try to feed the whole world, that the chemical companies' drumbeat is constantly, we need to feed the world. That's why we need all this stuff and these high yields. But if we would focus on feeding our communities first, instead of focusing on feeding the world, I don't think our role should be to feed the world. I think our role should be to help the world feed itself. And every community, when we go and dump cheap food into other countries, we destroy their agriculture and put their farmers out of business. And it's all in the disguise of trying to get them to grow a big cash crop that then is exported. And so that they have to buy their own food because they're not growing it anymore. And it's just a vicious cycle that just, if you study it, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's, the financial model is just a house of cards where there's, in the beginning, apparently a large amount of money to be made by somebody, and that's who's pushing it. But there's so much destruction in the path. We need to get back to where we started as far as self-contained communities and not worry so much about squeezing every penny we can out of consolidation and advantage of all that stuff that goes with centralization and consolidation. When we saw what happened during COVID, and I tell this story, people sometimes their eyes glaze over. They say, oh, well, everything's fine the way it is. Like you have watermelon in January. What's the matter with that? But when you taste that watermelon in January, it's not that great. You have watermelon in July when it's ripe out of the field. It's wonderful. But to ship it across the world from another part of the world in January, do we really need that? Why don't we start thinking about how great it is to eat in season when things are at their peak flavors, peak taste, all that kind of stuff. And actually, aromas and flavors in food are an indication of their nutrient value, because most of those aromas and flavors come from polyphenols and other antioxidants and things that reduce inflammation. There are secondary products in plants that are naturally occurring and encouraging people in their own way to eat. As they say, eat me, because I taste good, I smell good, I am good. And we've lost a lot of that. But if we would go back to that, it'd be more fun. So if we could get people to think in that way and talk about that, I think a real missing piece that we don't have is a real easy way to put a nutrient index, or in our case, we're working on an anti-inflammatory index on our food. And so that people could have an easy way to identify how much nutrition they're buying for that in that case of cabbage or that bottle of milk or whatever they're buying. They can see the nutrient value, and therefore they can justify spending more, if they know it is higher value, then it's easy to justify paying more for it because it's a higher value. And it's going to translate into better health or nutrition for themselves or their children or their ailing or elderly parents or grandparents or whatever. So everybody wins. And so that's been my philosophy, that if that would pervade through all of the food system, then I think we'd have a much healthier and better food system. So that's kind of where I started.
Yeah. So you're a serial entrepreneur. And so I'd love to cherry pick a few of your entrepreneurial pursuits or endeavors to explore how do you found value additive ways to sort of increase that everybody wins philosophy and make that happen. So I know there was like a transition from conventional wheat to organic, and then also from organic to ancient wheat. So that's just one. There's several other businesses that you've started up where you added a ton of value and found success for everybody. You want to speak to a few?
Sure. Okay. Well, yeah. And can I mention a couple things that a couple words that I don't use anymore that are very common in the vernacular, but I think they're sending the wrong message. It tracks us from getting back to the real story that we should be telling. I never use the word conventional when talking about this chemical experiment that we've been doing the last 70 years or so. And a lot of the wheels are coming off that bus. I don't even have time to talk about them all. But conventional to me is the kind of agriculture we've done for the last 10,000 years. That's conventional. And what we've done in the last 50, 60, 70 years, that's not conventional. That's an experiment. And now we see the detriment of that experiment. And they don't deserve in my mind, they don't deserve the compliment of being called conventional. But they're not conventional. It's an experiment. What we're trying to do is get back to conventional, but with a modern twist on it, focusing on the soil. The difference between an organic farmer and a chemical farmer is that we focus on feeding the soil, or chemical farmers focus on feeding the plants. So it's a very different orientation. And if we can get back to the root of our health is the soil, not how many bushels that we can extract out of it, but how we take care of it and how it is nourished. That is the difference. The other word I have trouble with is commodities. I don't grow a single commodity on my farm. And I did this once, and the reason I came to this idea, I was at a food show one time. A lady came up to me at a food show and shook my hand and looked me right in the eye and said, "Thank you for growing food for my family." And I thought, no one ever thanked me for growing food for their family before. As a wheat farmer, we don't go to farmers markets. We never see our end customer. We never see anybody that can say thank you for anything. We take our wheat by the truckload to an elevator, and the elevator manager comes out taking samples and trying to figure out an excuse to dock us or pay us less money for that wheat. There's never a thank you. That was just so foreign to me, but I went home and I never looked at my farm the same again. I'm not growing commodity. I'm growing food, good food that can nourish people, food that can bring vitality and health to the community. Commodity is an industrialization of something that a lot of farmers don't even think about growing food anymore. They're growing commodities that you can buy and sell in the stock exchange, just like, bicycles or anything. Anyway, those are the two things, and I don't mean to be critical of people who use them, but I like to explain how I look at those and how there really is a subtle difference about of what they're implying. What's implied?
I thought you were going to call out my usage of value additive. I know that's a portion of the book too, where it's that every marketer out there uses value added by re-adding nutrients back in or re-adding vitamins back in. You call it value. So what we're producing here at the Quinn farm is value not extracted.
That's right. Because now wheat, because of the popularity of white flour after, even before World War I, by World War II, most of a very significant number of the young men no longer passed the physical, and they were astounded that probably the greatest contributor to that was white flour. And they started requiring flour to be what they called fortified. So you're adding back what you thought you were taking out when you're making white flour. You're throwing away 30% of the nutrition, well, probably more than that of nutrition, but 30% of the volume of the wheat by taking off the bran and off the germ, where the vitamins are, and there's minerals there, and of course the fiber helps your gut be healthy with digestion, and feeding the microbiota in your gut, which is really important. So anyway, we tried to promote the idea of eating whole grain, but having raising wheat that is satisfying as a whole grain. Much of the wheat breeding program now in the last 50 years or so have been an effort to make the brands harder so that they're flake off easier. So it's just looked at as a byproduct to get rid of. They feed it to the pigs. The pigs eat better than we do, and by this program. But if we could get back to studying grains and growing grains that have a more original type of blend and high nutrient germ in them, then we'd be adding that health back. So we stumbled onto an ancient wheat in the late 80s also that we found quite by accident could be eaten by people who couldn't eat modern wheat. My father gave it to a lady nearby, and she said, well, let's try it. And she did kinesiology muscle testing because she couldn't eat wheat. She couldn't even get near it. And she found that she thought she could try it, so it would be okay. But when she ate it, not only could she eat it, but it made her feel better. And she called up my dad. She says, "What is this stuff? Because it makes me feel better." And I said, "Wow, well, we were selling it because it was a novelty that we told it came out of King Tut's tomb, and it was just for fun. We thought it'd make a great snack and different things for fun. We had no idea that it had a real nutrient value. And so when that happened, she said to us, "Well, I have a sister who can't eat wheat, but she's also sensitive to lots of other foods." And we sent her a whole case of this pasta that we made out of this ancient grain. We put a trademark on it, registered a trademark by the name of Kamutz, and that's what we sold it under, so we could guarantee purity and how it was grown. It was always grown organically and that kind of stuff to sell it with that name. And her sister called back in a couple, 4 or 5, 6 weeks, and she said, "Not only could I eat the grain, but after I ate it for 3 or 4 weeks, I was less sensitive to other foods." So it was not only helping her eat wheat again, but it was healing her body in a way that she was less sensitive to these other foods. So this is just astounding to me. This is the very first time I started thinking of food as medicine. I mean, I wasn't raised with this idea. I never thought about it before. But when we saw it, when it just hit me in the face, and you couldn't deny it, then we started doing research on it. And over 10 years, we've now published 35, 36 peer-reviewed journal articles comparing Kamut ancient wheat with modern wheat, and mostly in human clinical trials of chronic disease, because one of the first things we found was it was anti-inflammatory. And inflammation is tied to all chronic disease. And so we found that switching just the wheat, there was a significant increase in health with all these people with chronic diseases, from heart disease to diabetes to irritable bowel syndrome to fatty acid, non-alcoholic fatty acid, liver syndrome, all these kinds of things and these diseases. So that really opened my mind and my eyes to a whole nother world, just not organic. So it's, you often hear the couplet, healthy soils, the healthy food make healthy people, or the three couplet phrase. But we add to that now, starting with good seed. You have to have seed that has nutritional potential, not seed that's been, just genetically modified just for high yields and that sort of thing, or to be disease resistant or something. So more and more, I'm going back and trying to look at older varieties, heirloom varieties, things that haven't been really modified just for yield, and see if we can pick among those the ones that are the most nutritious, and then find those that are best adapted for our regions. And I think that is a better way to go. And so this is the other thing that we're trying to do in our food and production systems, and how we encourage other people to do the same.
Yeah, and I love what you're doing throughout the region, lifting so many other farm operators underneath the Kamut brand, and sort of everybody working with them underneath this trademarks brand. And I don't think of you as a marketer, Bob. I think in our first conversation, I don't even think you want to be anywhere near the word marketer, which is great. Is in the marketing for what matters context, you've created a lot of success in your businesses. You've from thin air, things just suddenly appear. You suddenly you're selling vast quantities of soy, safflower oil back to the University of Montana, for instance. Like it's just like all these businesses that you started at lunch. And I'm just kind of curious, what's your secret to promoting and sort of marketing and getting a new business off the ground?
Well, mostly I like to go and see what's going on all over the world, and particularly food shows, and like the folks all the time, and see what different challenges are and what different needs are. And I try to see what needs to be filled in those needs. So the oil story, I mean, it just didn't magically appear. It might seem that way from reading the book because I only had 200 and some pages,
right?
But it took years. It took years on all of those things. And so the oil story started with an idea of growing my own fuel. And I wanted to be fuel independent so that we could grow our own fuel. And so I started growing camelina, which was an oil seed that we could plant very early in the spring. We have trouble with other types of oil seeds because they bloom later and they are susceptible to high heat. And so this camelina wasn't. And so I wanted to use it for straight vegetable oil. And I didn't want to make biodiesel. Because that has its own set of challenges and expenses and everything else and byproducts you have to deal with. I wanted to be able to put it right directly to my diesel engine. And I took this to Europe, to Germany. Some friends I had made there that actually were using conversion kits for straight vegetable oil use in tractors and diesel engines. And they said, oh, well, you can't use this kind of oil because it's polyunsaturated. You have to have a monounsaturated oil. And so then I looked around and I found high oleic safflower. Oleic acid, fatty acid is a monounsaturated fatty acid. So we started growing that. And I had a hired man who took some of the oil to the local restaurant there in Big Sandy. And they said, wow, this makes the best French fries you've ever had. I said, we'll pay you $2 a pound for this. And so, I'm not real good at math, but I can do $2 a pound times, see what that is in a gallon. And that's about 8 pounds a gallon, and that's about $16. And so I could either put it in my engine, my tractor engine, or I could sell it for $16 a gallon. And even at high prices of diesel in those days, at over $5 or whatever it was, or $6, that was an easy decision to make. So we started making food grade oil. And then I was selling it to the University of Montana and to supply actually all of their oil, and also from Montana State University in their kitchens. And the folks at Missoula, the university said, well, I asked them if they could save the oil. I said, any chance I can get it back? And they said, oh yeah, we can get it back to you. And so I thought, well, I'll use the oil twice. We'll sell it twice. We'll use it first for food and then for fuel. And I just brought the oil home and I cleaned it, took the water out of it, put it through centrifuge, take out the big particles, so two filters, take out the little particles. And then we could put it in our diesel engine and it burned just like diesel. It had to be preheated, so I had to start the engine on diesel. And then once the heat exchanger heated up just enough of the vegetable oil to go into the engine, I didn't heat the whole tank, just a little small stream. It worked all day on the vegetable oil, and it was fantastic. So this to me was really exciting because, the big debates in this country right now about food versus fuel and all the acres going to produce fuel and the cost of that, the economic and also the ecological cost of growing your own fuel, like that with corn, for example, is what we're doing a lot of. Compare that to vegetable oil substitute for diesel, where you're using it first for food and then for fuel. There's no debate anymore whether you're growing food or fuel, because you're doing it both. You're doing it for both. And I see that as a real exciting potential for the future. We use enough fry oil in Montana to run our entire agriculture. We can't run the cities, but we could run, or all the trucks and the highways, but we could run agriculture. And I think that would be a neat combination to a loop to close between being dependent on foreign oil or international oil companies to run our farms and being able to run them on the byproduct of something that we're using for food in the first place. So that was a long trail to get there, but it was a lot of fun. And I still want to work on it some more and see if we can't perfect it and make it more available to other people to adopt.
Well, speaking of making things more available to everybody, I think this is a big part of your mission at Quinn Institute, making everything that you've learned over the decades of transitioning from the modern chemical soaked agriculture to organic and finding all sorts of ways to continue adding value and creating circular economies and reusing things like the oils from the cooking. I would love to go and just explain or help people understand what your mission at Quinn Institute is and how you're getting the word out. Maybe not the mission, because I think I know that, but how are you getting the word out? What's been successful, and what kind of traction are you getting so far with your marketing efforts?
Well, that's a good question. We're just in the very first season. So once spring started, we focused on the farm, on growing things and setting out experiments, and we've done very, very little marketing and trying to get the word out. We've created a website. However, you can look at quinninstitute.org, do social media, try to get the word out in that. But what we're hoping to at the end of each season, we had a grand opening, which was very successful. But it was very successful. That's nearly 100 people showed up. But 100 out of 300 million in the whole country, that's kind of a small start. But at least we want to make it accessible, and for anyone who wants to know more, easily to do so. We want to put together annual reports so they can start to show and demonstrate the kind of things that we are studying and want to accomplish. So we'll be doing the first one here this winter. We'll be starting to go then to conferences and giving presentations on what we're doing. So we think that can be a way to introduce more people to it. We haven't really had great success in fundraising at this point. We're not with a tin cup on the street corner, however. So we have had enough success to keep us going this first year, which we're very, very thankful for. I want you to know, and want our supporters to know how much we appreciate their help. But we're looking at a campus now of $25 million that we want to put up with administration and research, teaching facilities, lecture halls, small lecture halls, and places for people to stay for short courses or interns and all that kind of stuff. Machine sheds and having machinery to run a small farm and experimental research station. So all those add up to a pretty big bill. So we're just taking that a little as it comes in and a little bit at a time, and hoping for the best and just do what we can do. We've got one full-time employee now, our research coordinator, and we have a gal helping us with our social media and all the financial planning and all that kind of stuff part-time. And so that's when we started this first year. So we're just getting started, and we're hoping as we can tell more of our story that more people will be interested, not only participate, but to learn from it and also to help us support it. That's what we're hoping in the future.
Yeah. Well, it's working. That's exactly how I found you, is one of your wonderful little videos out in the fields posted to LinkedIn, as we work in regenerative ag space a little bit here with the Soil Food Web School. And we're kind of running out of time here, Bob, because I did want to highlight this, because there's a lot of people who watch this podcast who are interested in growing their businesses. And what I noticed throughout your entrepreneurial journeys is the importance of relationships in your success, and relationships in all manners, finding partners, listening to what your customers want. Where are they going? Where are consumers going? You just have this very innate ability to connect and listen to those around you. And if anything comes out of the air, it's the right person at the right time to help you take a business to the next level, based on what I read in your book. So can you just kind of speak to a little bit about how you develop quality relationships,
Oh,
especially in business?
well, it's not only business, it's all aspects of life. Making new friends is probably one of my most favorite hobbies. You can look at it as a hobby, but that's what I enjoy the most. I love going and seeing people in their native lands and in their homes, if that's possible, or just getting acquainted with how they live, how they think, and what their cares and joys or challenges are, and all that other stuff, so we can really relate to each other. We have so much more in common with each other than we have what divides us. I never focus on what divides us. I think that the divisiveness that's going on right now is the biggest disservice we could have in the whole country. And all this way of categorizing everybody and wanting everybody to be in boxes, that's insane. But we'll never get better acquainted that way. We get better acquainted when we're all together in the same room and around the same table and enjoying the same meals, all that kind of stuff. Retelling the same old jokes, all those things that help build bridges. I think that is so important. As far as business goes, I never spend much time with grandiose, multi-decade plans of like building skyscrapers. I just start with the one room where I'm at and try to do the best I can in that room. And then almost every time a window will open unexpectedly, or a door, and I go to the next room and I see, well, we can expand into this area or that area. I just take it kind of one step at a time, and I meet friends the same way. I don't try to go out and try to be everything to everybody. I just try to meet them where they are, and they can meet me where I am. And,
Yeah.
If I am what I am, I don't pretend to be something different. And so that makes it, it's easy for me. I enjoy it. It's fun.
Yeah.
And,
it shows. It seems like you really emphasize treating everyone fairly and everything fairly, including the soil and the land and the community. So there's no question in my head, why you've been so successful, Bob. And I'm really excited about where the Quinn Institute is going. I know it's just going to be a super powerful entity up there in a much needed territory in Montana. And I would love to. I know wildfires have been ravaging the U.S. Ravaging the world, really.
Yeah.
As we get into our segment for planting trees on your behalf, I hear that you may be interested in planting some trees where some scarred ground sits right now. So I'm going to share my
absolutely
tree.
right. I would love to help that way, because every summer we are focused. We're covered with smoke, and that smoke's coming from somewhere, and it's doing a lot of destruction. So if we could be a part of the healing of that would be fantastic. I would love that.
All right. Well, we're partnered up here with One Tree Planted, and we're going to plant some trees on your behalf. We'll just go to Buy Impact here on onetreeplanted.org and visit the Forest Fire Fund. There's that smoke you were referring to. So
Yeah.
over here in the Pacific Northwest as well. Bob, we'll make that donation and send you a confirmation email thanking you for your time and energy on marketing for what matters today. Are there any closing thoughts or inspirational words you'd like to share with our audience before we close out?
Well, other than to think about every time you go to the store, you vote with your dollars. And if you can vote in a way that heals the earth and provides opportunity for farmers to have a fair return, I encourage you to vote with organic food. It's a label that's defined, you can trust, and you know what it means. And it's not perfect, but it's at least a vote in a direction that can make a difference. So that's going to be my parting ask or plea or and hope. And also want to your listeners know we're always open to visitors or anybody would like more questions answered. We're here to do that and help encourage this kind of direction, this turning food back into medicine any way we can. So thanks again for your hospitality, and for connecting me and with such a wonderful audience, and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Bob. And we'll include Bob's links to his LinkedIn and Facebook, and his QuinnInstitute.org and Komoot International as well. So you can learn more about the journeys he's been on and the successes he's created through building relationships. Bob, thank you again for joining Marketing for What Matters. And until we see you next time, remember to love more, play more, and do more good. I'm Jam at Peaceful Media. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to our podcast, Marketing for What Matters. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, or Pandora. Love the show? Leave us a review and follow us on social media at Peaceful Media to stay up to date about new episodes. And as always, thank you to this earth for giving us all we've ever needed. See you next time.